Last year, the Supreme Court declared that Canadian laws protecting patients against doctor-assisted suicide were unconstitutional, even though no right to assisted suicide or euthanasia appears anywhere in the nation's constitution. Neither the previous Harper government nor the current Trudeau government made any attempt to ignore this undemocratic and unjust ruling by utilizing the notwithstanding clause.
Dave, do you believe doctor-assisted suicide and euthanasia should be legalized in Canada?
Well, I understand the public pressure for a law on this issue. My personal beliefs are that there is no law necessary. It should not be a process that's legalized.
The court had given Parliament 1 year to create a new law that would respect the supposed right of Canadians to doctor-assisted suicide.
Now, I know you work with the disabled and those who are ill in hospitals. Aren't you concerned that they're going to be very vulnerable if euthanasia is legalized?
I'm very concerned with those options and how the criteria is going to be brought about in the upcoming months, especially as a First Nations person, where we have the suicide epidemic going on with our First Nations youth right now, and where people are trying to determine the age for people that may be eligible for physician-assisted death. That option, we're looking at First Nations people who are committing suicide as early as at the age of 13 to as late as the age of 25 and even older. So the age or competency of people really need to be considered.
The Trudeau government recently requested that the court give it a 6-month extension. The court allowed it 4 months, so that we could assume that doctor-assisted death will be legal by June. The cash-strapped Ontario government has responded by holding a series of public consultations on the issue in 9 cities across the province. One was held in Thunder Bay at the Valhalla Inn on January the 20th, and St. Gabriel's was there.
Dave, could you tell our viewers who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for nearly 20 years now, and most of my work has been in the area of disability rights. I work with people with psychiatric disabilities, with developmental disabilities, and physical disabilities. It's a great part of my practice, and it's allowed me, I think, to have certain insights that especially into the issue of doctor-assisted suicide that maybe others may not have on a regular basis.
And as a specialist in this field, aren't you concerned that legalizing euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide would pose a great threat to the safety of disabled people in this country?
Oh, as a matter of public policy, I have deep concerns. The Supreme Court of Canada said in its decision, in its Carter decision, that persons with a disability are no longer vulnerable. Well, that's erasing 500 years of history that demonstrates conclusively that the constituency of people with a disability are vulnerable, and they are vulnerable to influence, vulnerable to coercion, and the main perpetrators of that vulnerability have been the medical model.
The purpose of the consultations was ostensibly to gather public input on the regulations should be put into place when doctor-assisted suicide is legalized. Public input on whether or not the practice should be legalized wasn't their purpose. Apparently now that the Supreme Court has spoken on the issue, there is no need for public debate. And
do you think it'll make a difference as to whether or not euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide are legalized?
Well, I think the Supreme Court of Canada spoke on that, and so it will be legalized. But as far as what that law looks like, that's going to take substantive public outcry if there's going to be a change. We know that there is a draft before us. The Supreme Court of Canada has made it very clear that the law will happen. And so key issues such as an ombudsman on euthanasia and or assisted suicide, there needs to be, I believe, legal representative for any individual who would wish to have doctor-assisted suicide, because it is the ultimate decision, and if there is a mistake made, that mistake cannot be undone. Adherence to the process, eliminating coercion, eliminating undue influence will be critical in the next stage.
The fact 9 non-elected judges have usurped the proper role of Parliament on this issue does not seem to concern many people.
And what do you think of these kinds of public town hall meetings on this issue?
Well, unfortunately, the input can be diluted very easily, and I do have concerns that there is several people in one room, and it's hard to break it out and really get that key stakeholder engagement that's so important in the development of legislation.
Perhaps the lack of democratic process on this issue has prompted the Ontario government to seek public input. After hearing a summary from a government spokesperson about recent major events concerning the issue, the participants at the Thunder Bay consultation were asked to vote on a series of questions relating to the finer points of doctor-assisted death.
What do you think God's position is on this issue?
Well, I think as Catholic people, we all know that committing the act of suicide or killing oneself, and I think ultimately our position is that God does not look too kindly upon it, whether how the government chooses to sugarcoat it or reword the terminology.
Although between 70 and 80% of the participants seemed to favor doctor-assisted suicide, a solid 20 to 25% seemed adamantly opposed.
Reginald, do you believe that doctor-assisted suicide and euthanasia should be legalized in Canada?
No, I don't think so. I think it should be up for discussion again and debated.
The participants were invited to share their views both in smaller groups and in the full assembly. Although less in number, the pro-lifers, some of them in wheelchairs and one of them blind, expressed solid arguments opposing euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide. The fact that the majority were pro-death proves that the media and educational slant in favor of doctor-assisted death has been very effective. These so-called town hall public consultations conducted by Ipsos Reid were a pseudo-democratic farce.
So I have deep concerns that there's an imbalance, a power imbalance, and individuals may feel that they are a burden to society, so they have to, for example, a burden to society, and so they must seek assisted suicide, or there's other reasons. And through my work, I've seen the great power of individuals willing to under very, very difficult circumstances live a fulfilling life, and that's a fulfilling life that to the outside observer may not be worth living, but they find a way to make it worth living, and if they're unduly influenced, I have grave concerns.
Legalized doctor-assisted death is a done deal. Only the finer points need to be worked out. The Canadian Charter of Rights of Freedoms seems to have replaced the Bible and common decency. In our once Christian land, and our non-elected Supreme Court justices have become its supposedly infallible and omnipotent interpreters. The governments of Canada, both federal and provincial, will soon allow death on demand. The culture of death has now been fully embraced by a once great nation.